Thanks for joining the session. Look, the purpose of this session is really to help our clients transition their level of understanding of predictive index and how it can be leveraged in their business. We find lots of people go, PI is nice and shiny and it's really accurate and it's got all of this amazing value, but it's quite hard to unlock that value if we don't get quite strategic in how we use it. So this session is really to share with you some best practice and new ways potentially you hadn't previously thought about using predictive index. So the key thing just to mention to you is that there's a huge amount of benefit to use people data, and hence why you're using things like predictive index. But the more you leverage data and insights around your people, the more that you can improve decision-making, build predictability in your business, drive retention, attract better talent into roles, cultivate the right culture that you want. And really PI can sit underneath a lot of these components for you, if not all of them. But we need to leverage them. So what we want to see happen is that it's really embedded underneath your talent strategy. For those organizations that do have one, we would encourage you to make sure that you can leverage it underneath your entire talent strategy. So we know there's some big stats around using data around people, and you can see there's some really good insights around increased productivity, profitability, reduction of turnover. We know when we get the right people into roles, they're more engaged, they perform better, instead of them trying to flex sort of against their profile, the profile of the role they might have been put in. So we know it works in recruitment, and I would typically say all of our clients say we love it in recruitment, but it can often stop there. And that's actually not where all the value can be extracted for you. What we do find in terms of what gets in the way for a lot of business owners when we talk to the CEOs like yourselves, yes, we've got our business strategy on one side. We're trying to get to these goals, these KPIs, these impact components. And what we often forget about is there's all this stuff that gets in the way. And that's things like, teams not communicating, managers were promoted too early and they don't have the skills. There's performance issues, people not performing in the roles that they're meant to be in. Development demands, and that's a big one at the moment. We're seeing a lot of requests for training and development and career progression and this big push. Change resistance, all of these things are going on in your business that ultimately can slow it down for you. And hence why we work with you on a framework around one, let's design the organization that you want. Let's design your culture, and we might do that through EVP or values. Role design, we might look at your strategy and do a strategy assessment in PI. We need to design the organization that will be set up for success with your business strategy. We've then got to recruit to that. We've got to make sure that we understand the right person for the right role. And the inspire piece is massive. That's how do we drive, constant engagement and performance out of people. And that pillar in itself is really big. But you can see there the big diagnose wheel that sits around it. It's very hard to do any of these things if you're not constantly diagnosing how you're performing, how your staff feel, what is their engagement level. And it's often a missing piece in businesses that they don't run a consistent biannual or annual comprehensive engagement survey. They might run some pulse checks, but getting a deep dive into the business is really important at least once a year. So the framework, we use, as you saw earlier on talent optimization, there's lots of pieces underneath it. We would suggest at a point in time for those who are interested that we support you with some talent strategy work, but we would be looking underneath the layers of this and seeing what's important, what are your priorities, what do you need as an organization to work on, but more importantly, what data do you have in the first place? So that's something we would come back to you on with some talent strategy work, is really doing a deep dive on some of these pillars for you. But you can see how relevant they are in terms of, predicting team dynamics, onboarding, self-aware cultures. There's just so much in there that organizations can be doing. And ultimately PI can sit underneath all of this for you, on top of, programs that we've built to support you. So we might get a quick Mentimeter for those of you who have used Menti before. That will be easy, but I might quickly... There we go. So what I would encourage you to do is get your phones out. And if you want to go to menti.com, Trent, you're driving, so don't do this or you'll crash. but you're always welcome to demute and just tell me your answer. So the question is, oh, that's 2 questions too far. Let me go back one. The first question is, where are you getting the most value out of PI? So Trent, I might chuck it over to you. I mean, where do you get the most value out of PI currently? Is it across, recruitment? Is it career progression? Is it development planning? Any insights from you? And you can put it in the chat if that helps. I'm conscious you're in a car. Yeah, 9245. But I mean, you can just share with the group if you like. I mean, where are you guys currently getting a lot of value out of PI?
So at the moment, again, as he said as well, just recruitment and managing people as well. So that, but we've actually started, I'm not sure if you know, but didn't like Joanne from Joanne. So we've been facilitating one-on-one sessions with our employees and using Predictive Index to really help people's performance and the engagement at Expertech. So that's what we currently have done. Yeah, so that was a pilot and it went well. I was part of one of the one-on-one sessions as well, so that was really good. So that was
almost using it a little bit, almost in that coaching framework.
Yeah, coaching framework. Yeah, so that was very good, and we really dug a little bit deeper into our PI. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, awesome. And so then my next sort of question to everyone is really around, where would you like to leverage it more? And I guess it's more comes down to your business priorities. What's going on where you go, you know what, next year we've got to get much better at, navigating performance issues, or, we've got levels of disengagement in pockets, or we are going to need to double down on recruitment because we might be growing, or we might be scaling back, which is still actually a right person, right role thing. Having a think about what is on the horizon in your people landscape for next year. What's in that people plan? Yvette, from you, your perspective on what's a big priority for next year in this list, would you say? I'm sure I've got a few to answer for you, but I won't answer for you, so you can share. You're on mute, by the way.
Sorry, was you asking me?
No, I was asking Yvette on the call.
Oh, sorry.
Was I muted? I was busy chatting and I was muted. I think building a more self-aware culture, certainly driving accountability would be something I'd be looking at. We have been using it for development planning, but I think I would like to see us using it there more. And I think measuring engagement and taking action is another one that I'd like to see us use it more for, and giving feedback.
Right.
I think we use it very much at the front end of the business when we bring people in. I'd like to see us using it more for the full journey of the employee.
Yeah.
That means a lot more training and upskilling of all the team leaders and managers.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, great. That's good. Good to understand, because I think what is helpful for us is where there's so much you can do with it. For us, it's often trying to make sure that we take it in those bite-sized steps with everyone based on where you're at, because obviously every business is at a different stage. But I think it's helpful to know how far we can go with it, or at least how it can underpin other things you might be doing. Like Regina is saying, in those one-on-one programs, it's great you've been able to leverage it in something you're already doing, but you're just adding more value to the process with tools you have access to already. So when we typically start with, brand new clients, we'll often say to them, well, how do we know where to go? Often this landscape's really, really messy because there's so many different people, different perspectives, different opinions. Well, before we start anything, you need to do your research. And hence why we definitely are big believers of doing an engagement survey, or an employee experience survey is what we call it. And we want something really comprehensive. So we used to use different tools pre to this, but what we found is there was so much science around this survey that's what we've sort of lent into. But there's really 4 things that drives disengagement with staff. And some of you have heard me talk about this before, but it's really these 4 things. It's how they feel about their job. Do I actually enjoy the job I have to do day to day? How I feel about my manager, how I feel about the people around me and the team, and then the wider organization. So we always talk about the job, the manager, the team, and the culture. And we really need to tick off that we're doing well in those areas, because we know if any of these start to falter, it's when people start to get disengaged. So to really get them to come to work inspired, motivated, and performing at their best, they have to be well aligned to their role, well supported by their manager, working with teams that have healthy dynamics, and then making sure that they've got the right culture to support them as well. And that's a lot of questions underneath those pillars, but they're the 4 main pillars that the survey is built off. Now, when you get your results back with the engagement survey, you're able to create these heat maps in PI, which is great. And you can have a look at how each manager is going, as long as they've got more than 5 direct reports in those 4 categories. And that's a great sort of overview. And they also get comprehensive reports on basically their team's results for all of the questions. So then we can drill into it in more detail. What Alexia puts together is this very colourful, what we call a heat map. And think of it like an absolute diagnostic scan. If you were to go into a hospital and do a big diagnostic on your body, it's a diagnostic of your organisation across departments, across male, female, across tenure, across different locations, different job categories, depending on how we cut the data for you. And now we can really see where the organisation is shining and doing really well. And we need to make sure we're keeping the programs you have there. But where are the areas that, oh my goodness, this is not looking so great? And the thing I often show to people is on this very far left column, that's your organisation score. And you're going to see, yes, there's lots of green, a little bit of yellow, and a tiny few spots of orange. But if you look underneath, there's absolutely big cancers sitting in there, these red items. Now, they're red hot because it means people have basically said strongly disagree to statements. But when they're averaged out over a group, they don't become as hot. So what we want to do is we want to pinpoint these hot areas, and we want to treat them, and we want to treat them quickly. And this is what most surveys don't do, is give you this level of detail and allow you to focus your efforts. And that's why they can be seen like a big headache, because it's like, oh, there's too much to do. Whereas we get quite laser focused on, here's where we need to focus, here's what needs to happen. So, and often people say, well, we're not big enough to do an engagement survey. We've got clients with only 30 people, and they'll still run the engagement survey. And again, at a high level, here's an example of a client of ours, high level, they're all in the 80s. That's not too bad. Underneath the surface, when we did some workshops and facilitation with the teams, we actually found there was 3 big issues sitting underneath these relatively high scores. A lack of professional development and training. Departments actually worked well together, but across departments they weren't. And some lack of accountability. So we were then able to develop some clear action plans for the business and the managers of here's what we need to do. So you can start to see actually using these insights to put these elements in your people strategy for the following, 12 months. These are the things we should focus on, these 3 things. And often when people do engagement surveys, I say, what are the top, 3 to 5 things that you got out of that survey that is now in your strategy? But most people can't answer me. And it's trying to get really, really clear on what your staff are asking for and how do we go and treat those things in the business. So we run a bit of a process with diagnosing your business, and it's basically to walk you through this wheel of taking you from unaware of what's going on. And most people go, oh, I've got a good feeling. But really, once we get the data, we're taking you from unaware to aware. So we have people take the survey. To build a level of deeper understanding, we run some focus groups with particular departments to say, here are your results, but let's actually understand the context and the perspective and what does this really mean and what is a solution? And they have to build action plans themselves with us. And then we then roll all of that back up to the ELT so that they can then build action plans at a strategic level. And then we run the next 12 months, basically. We do it all over again. And we make sure that, yes, we've embedded the plans and we're going to reassess and make sure there's an improvement. And if not, we need to diagnose why. So there's quite a, this can be done quite quickly, but there is a process to go through beyond just sending out the assessment and being done with it. There's actually a process you've got to commit to afterwards for it. So hopefully that gives you good insights on how to really run a an efficient engagement survey process if you're not running one already. It is a functionality in PI. If you don't have it currently, it's probably turned off. We can talk to you about turning that module on if it's something you're interested in, and then it's existing in that current environment for you. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was when we start to look at team dynamics, because it's another area of the tool we find isn't leveraged enough, because it's a little bit of lack of confidence really around how do I use this team component in the tool. Some of you will be familiar with being able to run a team dynamic, and you can see one here. Everyone's very heavy on the right, so they're a pathfinding team. The tool has really done a great job of developing the really good strengths and the caution areas. There's great recommendations, great opportunity to run team workshops around this to helping them understand more about each other. You can click on their names and have a look at their strengths. There's some great tools in here to do that team dynamic component. But that's pretty much where it ends for most companies. They use it for that one perspective. What you can do with it is really understand how a team is going to communicate and create a new almost playbook of how are we going to communicate with each other? How are we going to make decisions? And how are we going to actually take action and deliver in our team? So we will break it down into these 3 categories and really drive some change across those behaviors. PI has some of these elements in there, but we can really support making sure teams are getting maximum value out of having sessions together. But the other thing is interesting is, and we hear this all the time. In fact, we had a session this week where a client was saying we've got teams that work really nicely together, but they're not really communicating well with each other. There's a siloed kind of segment in the business. And interestingly, when you pull apart all the teams, they all have different team dynamics. So you can see here on the left, you've got a stabilizing team. They're very structured and organized, and yeah, process and precision teams are absolutely into the detail. They need time to think, time to process. And you've got this other team who's probably much more extroverted, fast talking, fast moving, doesn't get into the details. There's no surprise that probably they're not communicating effectively. Their communication styles are very, very different. So we can use PI to map out all the teams in your business and then build a level of awareness across teams of how we need to engage with these teams. The way we engage might need to look a little bit different. We can then also start to have a look at, well, how do we drive change? Because a lot of organizations, you're constantly navigating change. And in this example, a real live example, this is an executive team here on the right. And you can see that most of them are up in this, exploring or innovation agility quadrant. They're very big picture thinking. They're excited by change, love risk. They love that space, and they probably adapt easy to change, and they probably throw a lot of change onto their business. When we looked at their workforce, and the workforce is there on the left and the different teams, they're all very stabilizing teams for the most part. You've got a very stable, responsive C/A organization. They don't deal well with change. So there's no surprise that there's an absolute misalignment between the ELT and the rest of the organization. And we need to put different communication strategies in place. So even sometimes mapping this out across your organization gives you more insight into how do we drive change across the organization, but also different areas of the business. They might need different approaches. We might be able to leverage different people, different teams to support with times of change. But I love having a look at this big picture, because it starts to go, wow, we've got all this people data. We need to use it strategically. Like playing chess, we've got to actually really think a little bit more strategically about our people. The other thing that PI doesn't do is look at where a role sits in this wheel. However, we run a huge amount of training around the team wheel and how it's structured. C/A on the right, C/A, sorry, on the left, A/C on the right. And we can actually manually map where a job might sit. We've got heaps of resources to help you with that. So if we know this business development manager job is going to sit in innovation agility because of those reference profiles, we need candidates that are going to fit in that vicinity. So again, we can use this wheel even in role design and going, do we need someone up there? What are the traits we're going to see in the role? What are they going to enjoy working on? And if we find, in fact, actually they're not out meeting new people, they're not doing any of that, well, maybe we've profiled the role incorrectly. So again, this can just bring a new lens to how we're going to strategically design roles across our organization. Now, what a lot of people haven't quite got to yet is doing the strategy assessment in PI. Years ago, it was actually the first thing you did as you went into that module. It used to be do the strategy assessment, build alignment, and then look at the team. And they flipped it around about 2 years ago. So it's now team and then strategy. But what it means is most people never get there. They don't get to the strategy type. So it leaves it very untouched. When we have a look at the back end of PI, we know that it's not as used as other components. Like we know things like job profiling and candidate matching is a big high use for a lot of you. The value of understanding, yes, we've got the right person for the right role. I want you to think bigger picture. You know, CEOs, it's about the right teams for the right strategy. And that's where you can use PI more strategically. So think of your strategy as falling into some of these components. Up in that right is creativity and risk. It's new things. It's new products and services that are unique. It might be taking something to market. On the right there of, you know, competition and metrics, our results and discipline, you're going to see objectives. It's about market share. We've got great products. We've just got to capitalize on our market share and grow through things we already have. And then you've got predictability and efficiency. We've got lots of manufacturing businesses that drive their growth through efficiency, reducing waste, maximizing process technology to be more efficient at the thing that they do. And then engagement, that might be things like customer engagement. We need to get our customers more involved. It could be community. It could be lots of anything that involves either employee or customer engagement. So you can start to see where your strategy or team strategy might start to fit, and different, you'd have an organizational strategy, and then different teams will have different components. Your customer success team is obviously going to sit a little bit more around that top left quadrant, whereas other areas of the business might have more strategic direction in a different area. So we can have you take the strategy assessment. It's available directly inside of the design module. As you keep clicking through, after you do team type, it'll do strategy type. And here's just a bit of a screenshot of sort of what it looks like, where you've got your leadership objectives or team objectives. So if you're looking at your strategy and your ELT, you'd be doing the one on the left. And if you're doing more just a team, like a sales team, a manufacturing or a production team, we'd be using the one on the right, which is just standard team objectives. What then happens is we can start to map out, well, what are we working on? Are we launching on a new line of products, or are we developing new pricing? Sometimes it might be both of those things. We'd encourage you to typically select 5 strategic objectives. If you do too many, it just becomes you're working on everything, and also means you're working on everything and probably not 1 or 3 to 5 clear things. And obviously on those line items you saw, sometimes you're like, well, I don't know if that's exactly how we would articulate it. No, we'd have to look at your strategy and go, well, for example, determine how to commercialize our new ideas could be that we're going after a new larger client or project size, and it's different to what we have today. So we're trying to commercialize an idea, do something a little bit new or different. We can draw a line between those two things. And we can help you with that when you want to overlay your strategy to your teams. But we often have to do a little bit of creative magic to make sure that they line up for you. Because again, the language in there isn't going to look exactly like your strategic plan. But then, as you can see, this is what it looks like after you do it. Now, this is again, live example of a leadership team, and you can see where they all sit. And then this is in relation to a strategy, which is very heavily weighted on the left. It's about employee and customer engagement and predictability and efficiency. So obviously you can see the team is not obviously exactly weighted to where the strategy is. So we've had to put different strategic actions in place. We've had to really protect the strategy because ultimately components of it are at risk. We've had to bring new people in. We've had to put up special project groups. We've had to put some strategic things around that to make sure that we can make it successful. So it's a great visual, but ultimately it's not just about, okay, great, it looks nice. It's what are we going to do? How do we develop action plans that protects the business from risk? Now, this is another example with a client of ours who over time that I worked very closely with over a few years, we strategically recruited people in those quadrants. So yes, we had job profiles, but it was actually more about the team dynamics as we recruited. We knew people in sales did very well in that top right quadrant or the bottom right. And so that's what we went out and recruited. That's everything from persuaders to mavericks to venturers, you know, different styles. They'll bring different types, but they ultimately had to sit in that bigger quadrant. Customer success people, they actually had to be B over A. They actually had to enjoy talking to people. So you can see how well suited they are to their strategy. And that's because we had the luxury of doing that over 2 to 3 years. But that was all strategic hiring to drive maximum revenue in the business. Now, recruitment is something most of you feel pretty comfortable with, I would say, for the most part. However, there is an opportunity to really have a look at the nuances in recruitment, and that's where we can often help you. And sometimes people go, oh, we're recruiting for a salesperson. And I say, well, we're looking for a hunter, a farmer, because those will look different. And you can see the nuances across these two profiles of a new BDM who's much more dominant, yes, socially driven, going to be very proactive because of that A over C, open to risk, yes, A over D, versus an account manager who doesn't have that dominance drive. They are more about servicing the existing customers that you have. Still tiny little bit proactive, but there's some nuances in there that we would need to pick up and make sure that we're recruiting in the job. And this is when we start to look at, you know, right person, right role. You know, it's not black and white. You know, it's not like, yes, you're hiring tick, or no, you're not. It's actually having a look at really understanding, you know, what is their role going to look like and what is their profile? How much flexing are they going to be able to do? Looking at things like the cognitive data. And again, we're always pushing people to do the cognitive assessment because it gives you so much more context. I mean, you can see example 2 here. You know, collaborator pattern, nicest people in the world always say collaborators are so easy to work with, they interview well. But you can see how low that cognitive score is compared to the job. You've also got this wide maverick profile on the bottom one who, again, will turn up really well in an interview, but the cognitive, again, is potentially too far down on the bell curve. You'd have to really drill into that in an interview. So all of this plays such valuable insights when you're recruiting. Here's a quick example of how the blue here is the team, the purple is the CEO, and the green that I've highlighted there, they are the candidates. So this was quite an interesting piece of the puzzle because we can say, well, all the team actually sit quite far away from the CEO. And this role was really going to be almost like a 2IC to the CEO. All of these candidates bring a wealth of experience in their CVs, but PI really put a lens to start to differentiate them and say, well, this is where they're going to play well. And pretty quickly you can start to see, well, this SH person's probably quite close to DB, but you've actually got this person, TC there on the right-hand side of the wheel, who's going to be very proactive and maybe be able to keep up with the CEO in terms of that pace in which they want to work. But this, and obviously there's a job profile we looked at and you can start to see people who are well aligned. But again, my role is to help you start to think more strategically with PI. And that's why we had them do the strategy assessment and to say, well, where is the strategy in the next 12 months to 24 months? And you can see this big push up in innovation and agility. They actually had an exploring strategy. That then gave us a new perspective on these candidates because we already have enough weighting here in process, but we don't have enough weight up here in innovation and agility. And this person will need to flex up here. And that just brought so much value to the conversation and made the leader feel much more confident in the decision. Ultimately, it's not black and white. Discussions need to be had, interviews need to occur, but this certainly brings a new layer of insight and strategic action that we can reflect on. Now, the biggest challenge we often see is, you know, we love PI. You've got maybe 1 or 2 people trained in PI. In some instances, you've got lots. Some of our clients do actually extensively train their managers, but it is really hard to drive a lot of this insight if only a couple of people in the business know how to use it. I always say people love getting their results back, but then it's a bit of a, well, if we're not trained in it, how do we use it? So again, what we would say is we get managers to go, yes, take their own assessment. First of all, what is this is typically what they say. And then they do it and go, oh, this was really good, really interesting. And we would get them to get a debrief and attend some sort of PI workshop or training to understand it a little bit more. And then to build on the understanding, this is where we really need to leverage that training component. How do we use that in conversations, in management, in development planning? That's going to be really critical, because if they don't transition through this wheel and become confident as managers and leaders, it's basically a waste, right? So what we want to do is make sure we can transition your managers through this learning journey from unaware to aware, all the way through to I understand PI, I know my 4 factors and factor combinations, but I now understand how to use it in a development conversation. I know how to use it or tailor my style when I'm having a one-on-one, or when I'm having a career conversation, or when I'm running a team meeting. I know how to tailor that conversation. Now I'm starting to embody my learning and ultimately working up through to confident in using it in the way that they manage and lead their teams. But that doesn't happen through a 5-minute session, right? It really does. It's a transition that we've got to take people on the journey. We have a program called Manage with Confidence, which I'm showing you this more because of how complex it is to be a manager. Being a manager requires lots of things in terms of expectation. It's everything from business acumen and strategic thinking and planning and driving change, building your own team capability and competencies and development planning and leveraging new skills. It's also looking at, all those conversations they need to have, their emotional intelligence, driving engagements, performance management. So much is expected of managers in this current workforce. And often there's areas where they really lack the skill or the confidence to be able to execute as a manager, and that can start to impact things like their team. But again, we would go back to things like your engagement survey and see how your staff feel about the managers within the organization, because you will get some of that feedback in your engagement survey. We have developed a program for, we call it brand new managers, or managers who haven't actually received any type of formal training before. And what we did is we took almost the best bits of that intensive 12-month program of Manage with Confidence, and we turned it into our leadership odyssey for our newer or emerging leaders. And we walk them through this framework, which we also use when we do strategy work, is ultimately as a manager that they've got to now attract people. They've got to recruit, they've got to go and build job profiles, they've got to interview candidates, they've got to onboard them, but they're also expected to then inspire them, motivate them, retain them, manage performance, build connections across the team, and then they've got to grow and develop them. So we developed a 16-week program that walks managers through these elements. So yes, we teach them PI, but we teach them models that sit on top of that, how to give feedback, how to have better quality conversations, how to communicate differently to different styles. But ultimately, the whole program is sitting on top of touching PIs here and there. So we can look at how do we interview a little bit better, ask better questions, prepare for interviews. How do we look at my own team dynamics? How do I predict how my team might want to be communicated with? How do we do reward and recognition? Because based on your PI, you can start to predict different styles. But more importantly, I need to go and ask my staff how they want to be rewarded and recognized. And lastly, in Grow, we teach them things like development planning and how to coach through the Grow model. And again, looking at their team in alignment to strategy. So the Leadership Odyssey program is really designed to enable people to take their PI knowledge and apply it at work, which is a big hurdle a lot of managers face, depending on their level of maturity and how much training they've had. And lastly, we often forget about the individuals in your organization. We think about strategically how we're going to use it. We think about teams. We think about managers. But then what about the actual individual in the organization? What are we doing for them? So there's lots of layers to that. Yes, we can look at their behavioral report and we can sit with them and use it. And Regina touched on even coaching conversations around their PI and leveraging their strengths. You'd be looking at things like the management strategy guide to do that. How do we best manage and motivate this person? We can do development planning for them with their development chart, and there's lots of great tips in there. We can use the relationship guide to actually say, well, how are you going with this other person? It could be you, it could be their manager, it could be a teammate, it could be somebody they need to influence in business. And lastly, a coaching guide, which starts to look at How do they sit in relation to their role or a role they'd like to be in the future? Let's sit down and go through that together. So we encourage managers to do this with their staff, but ultimately it's good to equip employees to know how to use these tools and drive the conversation for themselves. So we have things like all hands workshops where we can come into your business and we run these really interactive workshops with everyone. I would call them the all hand workshops. And they're really designed to have people feel more equipped. I can use these tools. I can have a conversation with my manager. Because we want it coming at both ends in terms of top-down driven, bottom-up led across your organization. And we have a huge amount of YouTube content that we've created. We've got videos on every reference profiles, and these really have been designed for your staff. We have another series called How to Manage All the Reference Profiles, and they're great for your managers, but sometimes even staff like to look at that as well. So again, we've got lots of education content, and there's so much there in terms of, from a staff's perspective, how they can leverage the self-awareness, looking at communication styles, looking at behaviors to be more effective in their job. So the framework we use, which I sort of touched on earlier, this is the people strategy framework we like to walk you through and make sure that you feel really well equipped in your people strategy to attract, inspire, and grow. There's lots of pieces around how do we do that. So in the attract pillar, we'd always want to make sure that you've got all your jobs profiled in your business. Your top performers have been mapped to those roles, and we've really nutted it down. All your vacancies are using both behavioral and cognitive assessments. And then PI is integrated into your onboarding process, right? So those things are really important in recruitment. And often we forget to go back and profile roles that we haven't been recruiting for. So there's some of the things we'd want to tick off in terms of milestones. In terms of inspiring teams and inspiring individuals, we'd want to make sure that everyone in the business really understands their own profile and the profiles of the people around them. We want to really drive a more inclusive environment, really good teamwork and collaboration, because we know that leads to better quality results. And then we want to make sure your managers feel really confident as managers, and that can be an absolute huge hurdle for a lot of people. And we do that through different programs that we can run and support you with in terms of manager education. If you've already got programs, it'll be how do we weave PI into the programs we already have. And you can see some examples here of a client that has used PI on their intranet. So PI is a common language in their business. They've got it on their intranet where you can click on it. You can learn about PI. You can watch, they've embedded some of our videos. And that really makes it a part of the culture. We care about staff. We care about learning more about you. And we want you to feel more confident when you're interacting with other people in the business. One of our clients, for every new starter, she gives them a list of all the staff and all of their reference profiles. So they can then use that to go, I've got to go and have a meeting with Jessica. I'll look up her reference profile, before I go and have that first meeting. So again, it's a great way to onboard people into your business. This is from Lee, who was on the call and then she's quickly dropped off. This is just an example of how it can be incorporated into things like your company newsletter, and you can do education, but also have a bit of fun with it as well. Guess the 4 specialist patterns on these list of headshots. So it's a way to, yes, embed it in your culture, because that's where we know it gets really successful. And lastly, in the grow pillar, really embedding PI into your development planning process. Whether you've got, whatever particular framework you're using, we can support in making sure that PI is a part of every development conversation that you have, because we want to leverage strengths. But also looking at promotions and career progression, that's equally going to be important. So you can see there's lots of different ways we sort of start to measure success, and we can map solutions to the success goals that you want to make sure that you can move forward. So that's a bit of an example of how we might map out some of that talent strategy with you. So hopefully this session's been really helpful at giving you some bigger picture. What are other people doing with PI, but also how can you strategically leverage some of the insights there or get new insights using PI. And hopefully some of you might want to book a call with Alexa and me. All of you have our details. But we always this time of year offer a talent strategy session. So you can do that for 60 minutes. We can go through some questions with you to really assess where you're at and where you want to be. And therefore develop a little bit of a straw man of how you might get there, based on either things you've already got access to or things that you might not as well, some additional things. So we'd really encourage you to leverage that discussion with us. That's what we're here for. Always say most people come to us for PI, but you stay because ultimately it's the relationship and the services we can offer you, and the things that we can educate you around. So hopefully that's been really helpful. We're open to any questions that we've got from the room.